I can't do that.
Lisa's online.
Unless you want to give it to me.
Do I need to Zoom tonight?
Right. I was going to get to that when we did the introductions.
Yes, I'm sorry not to be there with everyone. I'm juggling meetings. I have one immediately after this, and I also loaned my car to someone, and I wasn't going to walk to City Hall.
In the 104-degree heat, huh?
So Leslie, you're as
Go ahead.
chair.
Shall we go ahead and get started? Yes.
I think so.
Okay, we're gonna, I hereby call this meeting of August 14th, 2023 of the Budget Committee to order. We'll start with introductions. Starting with our people that are online. Lisa Beatty, our mayor, is online due to meeting conflicts. And I think maybe we'll just start from here and go around. And then when we have two members who are for their first meeting here, so maybe you could just give a little. What?
Can you adjust your microphone, please?
Ooh, not something I'm used to doing. Is that better? Hi, Ann. Okay, so we are just starting the introductions, and we were going to go around if you want to start.
I'd love to. So, hi, I'm Ann Ober. I'm the city manager here in Milwaukie. It's nice to meet you. Welcome to the team. And hi. Thanks for joining us. Go for it.
Hello, I'm William Johnson. This is my first time being on this committee, and it's lovely to be here.
Hi, Robert Massey. I'm on the city council.
Hi, David Chitzazan, citizen member.
Desi Nicodemus, City Councilor.
Leslie Schachner, citizen member and chair at the moment.
Adam Kasperbody, City Council.
Mary Rose, citizen member.
I'm Sophie Sherman-Burton. She and her are good for me. This is my first meeting. Thanks.
Michael Osborne, Assistant Finance Director.
Toby LaFrance, Finance Director. And did we get our people on Zoom?
Yes.
We did. Okay, and the introductions.
Yeah, when you were out of the room.
Okay,
We have
perfect.
Lisa, and I think that Rebecca Stavengord is also going to be joining us, although she's not here yet. Okay, so the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Do I hear any motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
Any discussion? Anybody want to have any corrections or anything like that? Okay, so if there are none, it's been moved to approve the minutes and seconded, and I will take the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, at this time, we'll open the meeting to any community members that would like to discuss any business with the committee. Those wishing to speak that are not at City Hall, please email finance@milwaukeeoregon.gov or raise your hand in Zoom. You can also write a comment in the Zoom chat to indicate you would like to speak. Are there any members of the community that would like to speak? I see Michael says we do not have any. Okay, so next on the agenda is our urban renewal budget training that's going to be presented by Nick Hopenuk. Did I say it right? Who is the principal of Tiberius Solutions, I guess our contractor on this. I just want to say that this is something that I have asked for, and so I'm really glad that all the new members are here to get it at the same time. Thank you very much for coming and doing this presentation for us.
Thank you for having me, and we'll see if I pass the first test of getting the presentation on the screen. So, Nick Popanuk with Tiberius Solutions. I've been doing public finance consulting work for close to 20 years now. I've been doing work for the city of Milwaukie for about a decade of that, dating back to some work on the Moving Forward Milwaukie project. I led that when I was with a previous consulting firm. And then one of the recommendations from moving forward in Milwaukie was to establish an urban renewal plan. And I helped the city create that plan 7 years ago now, and have periodically checked in with the city to help adjust those financial projections since then. I have done, I don't know, maybe 300 projects now for dozens of jurisdictions in 7 states, many of them focused on tax increment financing. So I have a wealth of knowledge from those experiences with other communities. We're trying to distill that down tonight into about a 20 to 25 minute presentation. So there will be a lot of material that we're going to try to cover quickly, but we are leaving time for you all to ask questions as well during this presentation. The agenda for this particular item is how does tax increment financing work in general before we dive into the specifics of the city of Milwaukie, looking at your own revenue projections and then the implications for the budget committee. I'll start with this very summary graphic showing how tax increment financing works. So you can see what we're looking at here is in any potential hypothetical urban renewal area, the total amount of tax revenue being generated over time. And when an area is created, all of the taxes from the assessed value at the time of creation continue to go to all the overlapping taxing districts. That's known as the frozen base value. And as long as that area is in existence, those overlapping taxing districts will collect that same amount of tax revenue every year. Meanwhile, yes, we have
I
a
have
first
a
question.
Does the frozen tax base accommodate the 3% increases per year?
No, it does not. So this is that is the true impact of urban renewal is on the overlapping taxing districts. They are missing out on any growth in that area, including growth from just inflationary forces. So over time, the city, county, park district, they will have increasing costs of service, but their revenues from inside the boundary will stay flat. And that does provide some tension and some pressure on those overlapping jurisdictions, because all of the growth in the area is known as the increment value, and that increment all goes to the urban renewal agency to pay for projects inside the area. And that continues for as long as the area is around. Usually that's a period of 20 to 30 years, though there are certainly outliers in the state that have gone on for longer than 30 years. A couple of things I like to point out on this chart. This again is not any specific example, this is just a hypothetical, but they tend to look like this. In the early years, there is very little tax increment revenue. So when you create a new urban renewal area, they start off very humble, not generating a lot of revenue to fund projects, but it grows exponentially over time. And so in those later years, there is substantially more tax revenue that comes in. Oftentimes, jurisdictions will incur debt as a way to try to accelerate the timing of when they can access those funds to pay for projects earlier and then pay it off with that increasing cash flow in the future.
The debt is paid by the increment
Absolutely.
income.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any opportunity for someone doing tax increment financing to negotiate partial frozen base?
That is an excellent question. So this presentation is largely Urban Renewal 101. That's a good 201 question, but we'll answer it now anyways. There is in the state of Oregon, and this has only been around for the last 10 years or so, a concept of revenue sharing or under-levying. And there are two kinds of that. One is mandatory. When urban renewal areas hit certain thresholds, and I won't get into the specific details, but when they are wildly successful and they start collecting a lot of tax revenue per year, they can hit a threshold that requires them to start sharing a portion of that increment with the overlapping taxing districts. They also have the opportunity to voluntarily under-levy and share some of that increment with the overlapping taxing districts. They can't pick and choose which districts receive it, so you can't say we only want to give the city's general fund some of our revenue. If you're going to under-levy, you have to give it proportionately to all the impacted taxing districts, but that is an option, is to voluntarily under-levy. City of Wilsonville has been doing that. They sort of pioneered that approach with some of their more mature urban renewal areas and have been voluntarily capping the amount that they collect each year at a certain level and letting the excess go to the other taxing districts.
Thank you.
Another key term that we always want to make sure folks understand when it comes to urban renewal is maximum indebtedness. Maximum indebtedness is a legal term in the state of Oregon, and it is the dominant controlling factor for all urban renewal areas in the state. It is the total cumulative amount of debt that an area can incur over its lifespan. The reason that's so important is because our state constitution says that the revenue you collect from your urban renewal area, which we call tax increment financing, or we abbreviate it as TIF, that those TIF dollars can only be used to pay off debt. And so if you have a limit on the total amount of debt you can incur, you have a limit on the total amount that you can spend in the area. And when you hit that limit, you can no longer invest in any new projects. You just collect the revenue to pay off that debt, and then the area closes down. I also like to compare this to the debt limit on your credit card. It sounds like it's a similar thing, maximum indebtedness, you have a limit on your credit card. If you hit that limit, you can pay it off and now you can spend more money. That's not how it works with urban renewal. This is a cumulative lifetime limit on debt. Once you pay it off, it doesn't free up the capacity to spend more. Once you've borrowed the amount that you have in your limit, you are done. There are limits on that maximum indebtedness in terms of how large you can establish it when you're creating a new area and how much you can increase it in the future. And if you want to do anything beyond those limitations, you need to get the approval of the overlapping taxing districts. So your plan has a maximum indebtedness. You have the ability in the future, if you wanted to increase that by a certain amount, but it's fairly limited. I think it's 20% of the original amount. And anything beyond that, you'd have to get approval from those other taxing districts who are being impacted by these revenues.
Is that maximum indebtedness based in any way on the base rate that is in the urban renewal district?
Yeah, so the limitation on how large it can be when you establish a plan initially is based on the frozen base value of that plan. So if you create a larger geographic area that has more assessed value than at the beginning, you are allowed by statute to have a larger maximum indebtedness for that plan.
Okay.
Something else I want to highlight here, and I could have an entire half-hour presentation on just this one concept alone, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. The state of Oregon limits the growth in assessed value to 3% per year, unless you have a few exceptions that occur. And by far the biggest one of those is new construction. So when you're looking at an area, an urban renewal area that generates all of its revenue from the growth in assessed value, new construction is the lifeblood of the revenue for this area. That being said, the power of new construction to increase your assessed value has been diminishing over time. And that's what this chart's showing. So whenever a new construction project comes on the tax rolls for the first time, let's say you build a new $1 million home, which used to be an outrageous example, but now sounds like a median home around here. You build a $1 million home, it does not have an assessed value of $1 million in its first year. The county assessor looks at this ratio of the real market values to assessed values countywide and says we're going to apply that ratio to your new property. Back in 2014, as you can see on the screen, the ratio for most property types was in the 80 to 90%. So $1 million home would wind up having an assessed value of $800,000 or $900,000. Today, that's down closer to 50 to 60%. So the assessed value of that $1 million is only going to be $500,000 to $600,000. That's been steadily declining, and it's probably going to continue to decline in the future, which means over time, folks could be building millions of dollars of investment in your urban renewal area or elsewhere in the city, but the amount of taxes they're paying is based on a much lower number. So it's still very important for urban renewal areas in order for them to thrive financially to attract new construction, but the amount of new construction you need to boost your revenues continues to climb every year based on this factor.
What is I'm confused. When you say it's declining, is it declining for that individual property that started out at $800,000, or is it declining for all properties for everywhere?
Yeah, so this is the ratio that is applied to every new property that is built. Once it has been built, it can then grow at 3% per year. as allowed by the state constitution. But for any new thing coming on the tax roll for the first time, it has a particular percentage applied to it. And right now, that percentage is down to around 50%.
And what's driving the decrease?
So the driver of the decrease is the overall county-wide property value market, comparing the real market value of all the homes in the county to the assessed value of all the homes in the county. And those two things are different just because of Oregon's property tax system that says your real market value might be going up 10, 15% per year over the last decade, but your assessed value can only go up at 3%. And so because real market values of properties have been far outpacing 3% growth per year, that's why we have this broadening gap between real market values and assessed values.
It's the chart that's in our quarterly report where we show the difference between the, what we're getting in general revenue and what the real the real property value is. I get it now. Okay, thank you.
So we've covered how the revenue is generated for an urban renewal area. This is now what you can spend those dollars on. And there are some significant restrictions and limitations to what you can spend your tax increment revenue on. First, any project you want to fund has to be identified in your adopted urban renewal plan. If it's not in the plan, you can't spend money on it. You can amend your plan if you'd like to change the list of projects, but you have to go through a formal public process for that, lots of public notice and hearings and all those things. So it's not as simple as just spending it on whatever you want. All of those projects also have to be located within your urban renewal boundary. So you can't spend these dollars all over the city. It has to be in the area where the revenue is generated. In general, urban renewal agencies can have the powers to do new construction, real estate transactions, and public-private partnerships. So most of the projects will fall under those particular categories. And they have to be capital projects or the administration of the plan itself, but you can't spend it on general operations and maintenance. So a great example of this is you could use the dollars to build a new road, but you couldn't pay staff to then go out and maintain that road in the future. There are, oh yeah.
Quick question on that. So if I might be forgetting, but from a past meeting when we were talking about this kind of stuff, I want to say would a repainting of a building qualify as a capital project? Because that, I'm a tax accountant, so whether or not that's considered like capital expenditure versus maintenance of it, I'm just curious.
Yeah, there is a gray area where some things can be classified as either administration or operations or capital. Because that paint is intended to last for 20 years or more.
Gotcha.
I think your attorneys would say that that's an allowable use.
Okay.
There are certainly programs all across the state where they use urban renewal dollars to fund storefront improvements, and a coat of paint is a part of that. Usually it's more than just a coat of paint. They're doing actual physical improvements to the building, but along with that there's the regular beautification of the building facade as well.
Got it. So it's whether more or less the gray area is whether or not it's long, it's
Over a year or something.
it's like a long term versus not.
Yeah, and a great example of something that folks really wish they could do with urban renewal, but most city attorneys have told them they shouldn't do, would be maintaining flower baskets and things like that are in the street. Installing them originally, putting in benches and trash cans and street signs and flower baskets, that's a capital project. But then having folks go out there and water them every week is not. So.
Thanks. Got it.
So on this slide here, I'm not going to go over each and every one of these categories here, but I will say that they're heavily weighted towards economic development. A lot of buying and rehabbing or demolishing and then selling private properties to try to stimulate new taxable development in the area. And then a really important bullet point that is what is kind of the focus of a lot of cities that use urban renewal is the construction of streets and utilities. That's kind of a very broad bullet point in the statutes that allow you to invest in a wide range of infrastructure projects. A lot of things fall under the banner of utilities.
Is there any rule or even just a rule of thumb in terms of how much of the money goes to city capital projects and how much goes to private?
There really isn't. There's, again, in the, I would say in the Urban Renewal 201 category of education, there is a recent change in statute that prohibits jurisdictions from using urban renewal to fund certain types of public facilities. So schools, city halls, fire stations, police stations, they've all been now specifically called out in statute as not allowed unless you get concurrence, that's the approval of the overlapping taxing districts. So there's been a push in recent years by special districts in Oregon to try to discourage the use of these funds for purely public facilities and to focus on projects that will incentivize private development, whether that's directly investing in a private facility, like buying a private lot, cleaning it up, doing brownfield remediation and then selling it, or whether it's doing a street improvement that will facilitate and catalyze private development in the area. The focus has been more towards that and away from libraries and schools and things of that nature.
One question, Nick. Could you give me an example of relocation assistance?
So relocation assistance, later on in this presentation, we'll have a slide that talks about some of the ways that urban renewal was used inappropriately in the past to negatively impact certain communities. Let's say you've got an area that has an existing residential population and you've deemed it blighted, communities that would go in and bulldoze all of those homes and turn it into something else. And those residents are then kicked out on the street.
How all our freeways got built.
Exactly. So the relocation assistance allows the urban renewal areas to spend funds to help displaced persons from urban renewal actions. And so urban renewal doesn't allow for condemnation for private uses, but it still could do it for a freeway, for example. But for the most part, we're seeing willing property acquisitions. But even if there's a willing seller, you still have the power for an urban renewal agency to help those displaced tenants find a new home or a new place for their business to open, so you can help folks that are displaced from your own actions.
Thank you.
Key point on governance, and really the first bullet point is the one that matters most here. The Urban Renewal Agency is a separate legal entity from the city or the county that establishes it. So we are meeting tonight in the City Hall. We have members of the City Council on this commission, and we have city staff that are here, but this is not the city. This is the Urban Renewal Agency, and it is its own separate legal entity. And that's important to keep in mind, especially for a budget committee. You will be adopting two separate budgets, one for the city, one for the Urban Renewal Agency. They do not commingle, they don't intermix. If the Urban Renewal Agency is low on funds, it can't just take that money from the city's general fund. You do have the ability to do a loan from the city to the Urban Renewal Agency, but it's not an inter-fund loan, that's an interagency loan, because these are two separate legal entities. That also means that any debt that is taken on by the Urban Renewal Agency is its own debt and not the city's debt, unless the city expressly chooses to say, we'd like to put our funds as a backstop on that. These are very separate entities. They need coordination if there's going to be any partnership that occurs.
So is that a common practice for a city to backstop its URA?
It is. It's been less so in recent years. The biggest benefit of a city providing a backstop on debt for an urban renewal agency is that it makes it a more secure borrowing, and that means that the potential bond investors are going to like it more, and that's going to bring down your interest rates. Well, interest rates were so low for so long that wasn't necessarily a major consideration. They are not low anymore, and so folks are definitely looking at strategies where they can decrease their interest rates that they have to pay on debt. A lot of times cities are willing to do it because the tax revenue stream for an urban renewal area in the state of Oregon is about the most risk-free revenue stream you can find. It's all property tax, and in the state of Oregon, because our property tax system has such a big disconnect between those real market values and those assessed values, that even if there's a terrible drop in the real estate market, most people's assessed values keep increasing 3% per year. So there's this very steady built-in growth. that you can almost guarantee that the revenue in your area is going to be more next year and the year after and the year after.
But not in the urban renewal district, because those taxes are frozen.
They are frozen, but still the growth all goes to the urban renewal area, and those
Right.
properties are almost guaranteed to grow. The only places where you really see urban renewal agencies have a drop in their resources from one year to the next are when there's a natural disaster that occurs or a business disaster that occurs. And so natural disaster, we've had wildfires in the state in recent years. Some of those have burned through the community's talent. In Southern Oregon, had a terrible wildfire that went right through their urban renewal area, caused a very large drop in their revenues. And then there are some areas that have very small boundaries where there's one very large industrial user, and if that user goes out of business and sells off their equipment, then the assessed value drops as well. So those are really the only cases. In an area like Milwaukee's, where it's a pretty diverse group of properties, you really don't need to worry about the impacts of a single business closing on this area's assessed values. Wildfires or natural disasters could hit any community, but typically worrying about your urban renewal indebtedness in the face of a major disaster catastrophe like that, this is going to be number 100 on your list of priorities if an event like that were to occur.
And what happens to the district when it loses all its money?
If it has outstanding debt, it's going to need to renegotiate the terms of that indebtedness. Or if the city provided a backstop, the city's general fund will need to come up with it. Again, these are very rare situations. I've done, for urban renewal projects specifically, I've probably worked on close to 200, and there are 2 examples that I know of where there has been this decrease in revenues. And even then, because of the massive disconnect between real market values and assessed values, these communities were still resilient. It wasn't like they couldn't pay their debts for 10 years. It was, okay, well, let's restructure our payments for the next 2 years until our revenues are back at a place where they could cover the debt.
Thank you.
We've talked a lot about debt, and this slide specifically gets to debt, which is kind of the 2 main strategies or approaches that an urban renewal area can take to funding projects. Pay-as-you-go, which is not incurring any real debt and funding projects on an annual basis, and then debt financing, where you are taking a long-term debt so you can fund more projects today, but you're tying up your long-term cash flow to pay off that debt in the future. Pay-as-you-go is great if you don't want any risk at all. You're only spending the revenue that you have in your bank account, so you can never overextend yourself. There's no interest that you have to pay. There's no risk of default, but it means your projects are going to happen much slower, and because they're happening slower, you're going to be paying more inflation on those projects because they're happening later in time. Meanwhile, on debt financing, you do have interest that you're paying on the debt, and that's becoming more, though still municipal interest rates are much less than if you're going out to get a home loan or something. And there is some risk of default, but as we just talked about, again, hundreds of projects that I've worked on, 2 projects where I've actually seen the revenues decrease from one year to the next, and those were from extreme circumstances in an area. By taking on that debt, then you have the ability to deliver your projects faster, and that means you're going to have less inflation. So, and most communities don't do just one or the other. They do a combination of both, where they'll do large capital projects, they'll do debt financing for, but they're still having administrative costs and smaller programmatic costs, like storefront improvements, that would be occurring on a cash basis. So a couple of best practices here. Debt should be used to accelerate the delivery of time-sensitive projects. The urban renewal agencies that aren't incurring debt probably aren't increasing their tax base as much as they should. They probably aren't achieving the goals that they've identified in the plan, and they are not implementing the projects that the city council adopted in that plan. So things are languishing as a status quo. Incurring debt allows you to have an impact in this area and accomplish your vision. That being said, if you have any regular recurring annual program expenses and administrative costs, they should not be funded with debt. If you know you have a bill that you need to pay every month, borrowing money to pay that bill just means that next month you have to pay that bill plus interest on the debt that you took out. So recurring, regular programmatic expenses you want to fund on a cash basis.
Who pays the URA staff then that are,
Well, so
they don't have recurring annual, I mean,
Oh, they can have recurring expenditures. They shouldn't be funding that with long-term debt.
Oh, okay, they're funding it out of the regular funds coming in, not the
Yep.
long-term.
Yep.
And we do have, so just so everyone knows, we have selected a contractor to help us develop programming not using our debt financing. We also have some staff that in the next budget will be allocated funding from Urban Renewal to do a portion of programming.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
We've talked already about the full faith and credit pledge. That is the city coming and saying, we're going to back this debt. So that's something that you should keep in mind. There's not a yes or no answer, just something that you should always consider if you're doing debt. Similarly, considering the implications of taxable versus tax exempt bonds. If you're investing in a private developer's project, that's going to be taxable and it's going to have a higher cost of interest than if you're building a street that's a public project. And the last point, they're avoiding pledging TIF as a secondary source of debt. We don't have time to get into that detail today, but if that ever comes up, please bring me back to explain why that's not a great idea. So now we dig into the details specific to the city of Milwaukie. This is your proposed boundary. It includes your core downtown and then several transportation corridors that connect it over to central Milwaukie, which is largely the employment zoned areas along Highway 224 and the railroad tracks there. This urban renewal plan has adopted goals. Those are goals for public involvement.
Could you go back to that
yeah,
map for a
absolutely.
minute? I like to, it takes me a while to figure it out. So, I don't understand how come there's
Yeah.
different things blocked off. Is it all one district?
It's all one district. The
Okay.
roads are connecting two different parts of town.
Okay.
So on the right-hand side, you have things like the hospital, Milwaukie Marketplace, Monroe, the new 7 acres apartment. On the left, you have downtown core. Does that make sense?
Okay, and does it include all the way out to the river and?
All the way to the river.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can't speak, I wasn't here for the council at the time, but I can make some assumptions. So there were some desires to work on specific projects. We did not, for a long time, think that 7 acres was going to be developed. It had contamination on it. There was some concerns about the site. There is also a desire to be able to help Providence do any major renovations that would encourage things like housing and other things in the space. So it's our major, what historically have been our major hubs, other than the Safeway, which was somewhat recently developed at that point, and successful. Is that, Joe, do you have anything to add? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I don't know, maybe it's just helpful to quickly point out, so there's 7 acres here, Hillside, Manor, Providence, over here, downtown, here, just to clarify.
And then the roads really are just the connectors. So this is just making
So,
it one
so
district.
the things that are in those boxes in the middle are actually not in it?
That's not in it.
That's not in it. Okay, that was what was confusing me. Thank you.
Sure. Sure.
And you mentioned Safeway. Safeway was outside of it, so that was not included, it was not an urban renewal.
It's on Harrison.
Yeah, okay.
Wasn't there a Safeway downtown?
There was.
Old one,
Was.
that's where,
Way down here.
Okay.
yeah, that's where those apartments all went in across from the library.
Sorry. Okay.
No, thank you. That was very helpful.
Oh, no, we were getting in trouble with Michael for not speaking into the mic. So just so
sorry.
that I repeat myself clearly, the boxes in between the two nodes are not included. Only the roadways are included in the urban renewal district. And the Safeway area is not included in the urban renewal district. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
One thing that we identified as we put this presentation together was the need to have a better map. So next time you have a meeting on this topic, hopefully it'll be more clear.
Just some shading.
Yeah, shading,
Shading in different colors.
second that motion.
So there are adopted goals in the urban renewal plan for public involvement related to economic development and other development, infrastructure, including public spaces and transportation, creating a sense of place, and then fiscal stewardship, making sure that you're being responsible with those funds. And in the plan itself, much more detail on each of those goals. So again, we are going through everything at a very high level today, much more detail in the plan.
So the fiscal stewardship one, is that city staff that is providing that oversight of the URA?
Well, that's for the plan overall. Whether it is city staff that winds up being the ones that implement it, or whether it's through the actions of the budget committee and the budget documents that are approved, or whether the urban renewal agency ultimately hires its own staff or its consultants to help implement it. Overall, whoever is working on the urban renewal area has a goal of fiscal stewardship to pay attention to.
Okay.
So right now, the way it works is it pays a portion of people like Toby and Joseph's time. But we also just contracted for the first time with John Southgate. John Southgate is a contractor to Urban Renewal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's some of both. We have some of our
And it sounds like
independent.
it's in a process of changing.
It is, so we took out the debt. Part of why we're doing this today is because we now have debt. We have taken cash and we need to expend it over a 3-year period. And we also didn't take debt on a portion of it, which is our programming money, which means we need to implement the programming in order to expend those dollars.
And is it audited separately from the city's audit? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the projects in the plan, there are, I don't know, maybe 20 specific projects that are listed, but they fall under broad categories of infrastructure being the most expensive category, then economic development, then public amenities, which is largely parks and open space, and then overall administration and financing of the plan. Oh, and all told, those projects have an estimated maximum indebtedness, we mentioned that earlier, of $92.5 million. Incidentally, that $92.5 million at maximum indebtedness is in nominal dollars. That is not your purchasing power in today's dollars. So at the time this plan was adopted in 2016, it was estimated that that $92.5 million would be able to pay for $58 million worth of projects in 2016 dollars. So inflation keeps marching along, and by the time this 20-30-year plan is completed, they estimated that those 58 million of projects would have inflation occur that would make them cost $92.5 million.
So what is included in economic development?
So in the category of economic development, we are looking at pre-development assistance, tenant improvements, small business development, developer assistance, and downtown Main Street enhancements. Those were all under the category of development and economic development.
Can you talk about public amenities, just while we're at the definition?
Yeah, so the public amenity projects that were listed here were South Downtown Plaza, Riverfront Park, Dogwood Park, Scott Park, new parks and open space in central Milwaukie, gateway entryway improvements on McLaughlin Boulevard, wayfinding and signage and heritage plaques, and then Kronberg Park and the Kellogg Dam removal.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so lots of details in the plan itself. These documents hold up pretty well over the years. This is a forecast of the financial capacity here. What you're seeing in the orange color are your actual tax revenues each year over time, and then the blue is the forecast that we did maybe a year or so ago, that forecast that into the future. And again, these are different forecasts from what was originally in the plan, which was from 2016. But this is a very typical looking trajectory for an urban renewal area. It starts at almost nothing, and then it increases exponentially over time. You went from nothing to about $600,000 or $700,000 per year in the first 6 or 7 years. By the time that you get to 2030, we're estimating that's going to be $2 million per year. By the time you get to 2040, it's going to be $5 million per year. The compound growth of even just the 3% appreciation on properties, but factoring in the new construction on top of that, just leads to this slow snowballing of your financial capacity.
So these are the annual revenues, they're not cumulative?
Correct, that's annual revenues each year. And the reason it drops off a cliff in the final year isn't because we are anticipating an asteroid will hit it. We know that in that final year, you can only collect as much revenue as you have to pay off your maximum indebtedness, and so we're estimating in the final year you wouldn't need the full amount of your revenue, so some of it would have to be shared with the overlapping taxing districts. So what are some of the implications for the Budget Committee? First, I think defining what failure is and what success is important. This is my definition based on working with other communities. You feel free to have your own definitions of success and failure here. Failure of an urban renewal area to me looks like no change. That at the end of your urban renewal area, that area looks exactly the same as it did before. No development took place. There was no private investment that occurred. Maybe that also means that you're generating less revenue than you were expecting that you would because you were planning on new construction and it didn't take place. Maybe it means that you collected tax revenue but never spent it on the projects that you wanted to. It's sat there piling up in your bank account while nothing was happening, no change was happening in that community. Another bullet point there, maybe you did make investments with the dollars, but nothing came of them. You invested them in things that didn't bring the private investment you were expecting. I worked with a community in Oregon that 15 years ago built their own municipal water system for this specific industrial area with the promise that it was going to be used by a bunch of industrial tenants. That if you build it, they will come. So they built a $15 million water system. Nobody ever came to use it. So that looks like one version of failure. The caveat there is they still do have a pristine water system and they still do have developable land. And they are continuing to explore talks with private companies. And someday there will be a big developer that comes there. So sometimes your failure will look like success on a longer time frame. But if things aren't changing in the area, that is how I define the failure.
Nick, can I just add a quick comment? So one of the things that we talked about when we were looking at the 5-year plan was also that one of the failures would be that we lose small businesses owned by people of color, or that we push people into poverty. Like that was a big part of gentrification and fears around that. So a lot of the work we did when we were looking at this was also how do we make sure that our current small businesses succeed? How do we make sure that our communities are stable? And that we're not using this just to gain revenue as a community and to look polished, right? Like to grow our identity. This is about creating more Milwaukie, not creating a different Milwaukie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with it. I wonder, I don't know a lot about this, but I do remember reading about Oregon City's fights about the urban renewal district. In this framework, what happened to them?
Well, so they have had legal opinions and lawsuits that have prevented them from spending any of their revenue. So they are collecting revenue and they legally don't believe that they can spend it. Now, they still have pending court cases because I think they have a very strong case. But while this is tied up in the courts, they can't spend any of their revenue. So they are collecting it and it's just sitting in their bank account. That's certainly a failure of urban renewal, though not on the part of the city. It's just
Right, the city's trying.
the legal situation they find themselves in.
Right, okay.
So on the success side of things, and my next slide will get to Ann's point as well, because it's more nuanced than just these bullet points. But success of growing the tax base, funding the projects you identified in your plan, collecting more tax revenue than you were originally anticipating because you've been so successful in incentivizing development here, and realizing that change that you envisioned in this area. One of the reasons why growing the tax base is so important with this tool is because the overlapping taxing districts are foregoing their revenues for a period of 20 or 30 years while you're collecting it and spending it and investing it on their behalf, essentially. And you'd like, when the area closes down, that it has a higher tax base than it otherwise would have had, so that those other taxing districts are benefiting in the long run. Yes, they had to give up the growth in revenue here for 20 or 30 years, but now that it's completed, there's much more value in the area and they will benefit long term.
So in terms of when it ends, are the new projects that have been built the bigger tax base, does that come on to the city and the other districts' rolls up there, or at some reduced amount?
They receive the full amount of value of that project at the time that the area closes down. So,
That we collected taxes at the full amount.
yep, yeah, originally the urban renewal area was collecting all of it, now all of that transfers over to the other taxing
And
districts.
are they limited, they're to the same kind of 3%? and
From
all?
that point forward, yes.
Okay, but not while they're in the district.
Well, while they're in the district, yes, everybody's limited by 3%, but the overlapping taxing districts will receive a giant bump in their revenues in the year that the district closes down, as this value transitions from an urban renewal value to a general assessed
And it
value.
transitions at the same value. It's
That
not
it was,
then-
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Same value it was for the urban renewal area is the same value that it will be for everyone else. So this next slide gets into gentrification and equity. You need to look at success and failure with this equity lens. It's possible for you to have major infrastructure investments and growth in the overall tax base that looks like success according to those 4 bullet points on my previous slide, while having a seriously negative impact on specific groups in your community. And this is a tool that's been around for 70 years or so, and there's been a history of using this tool inappropriately, especially in major East Coast cities, to completely disregard communities of color, low-income communities, to just demolish those communities, tear the hearts out of them, and build something else that benefits the majority at that point in time. And the tool was used in Portland as long as 40, 50 years ago, and had some of the similar problems with the tool then. Some things have changed. One is a better societal understanding that those actions were wrong, but legally in the state of Oregon, you can no longer use powers of condemnation for the benefit of a private party. So that helps a lot. You're not going to be condemning property to just give it to another developer to build something else there. It could still be occurring for public infrastructure projects, but that's less of a problematic issue. And then also the fact that every project has to be identified in your plan means that the city council or the budget committee can't just choose unilaterally, hey, this is a new project that we want to fund, and who cares how it affects this particular community. All of the projects that you can invest in have already been spelled out. And those are parks, and they're roads, and they're business grants, and those are projects that should, in theory, have equitable benefits in the community. And as Ann mentioned, staff are continuing to focus on this issue of equity to make sure that it's always at the forefront when thinking about where you're going to invest your dollars here. So we are beyond the time that we had allocated for this section of the agenda, I think.
No,
Or
we
have
still
a few
you still
more
have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, good. We have a few more slides here.
Okay.
Some successful examples of urban renewal in neighboring communities. One is Wilsonville. Wilsonville has been a longtime user of tax increment financing. They have 3 large-scale urban renewal areas, and they've had a number of unique site-specific individual property urban renewal areas as well. They're one of their oldest, and their first one to close down, it just closed this year, is the year 2000 plan. That year 2000 plan was established in 1990, was largely vacant land, had $30 million of assessed value. It's now valued at over $600 million. So they had a 20 times increase in their property values here. Built whole new communities from scratch, built a range of different housing types and densities there. In fact, Wilsonville, I think more than maybe any community in the region, has an overabundance of rental properties and multifamily properties as compared to single-family detached homes. And a lot of that is because of the more compact housing choices that were built inside of this urban renewal area. So lots of public-private partnerships that occurred, building transportation and park projects. Also investing in things like schools, which are no longer allowed by the state statutes, but really doing a holistic investment in the community to see this tremendous growth in assessed value. Lake Oswego, there are elements of that community that lots of other communities would like to emulate. There are probably elements of that community that other communities would try to avoid. But their downtown is a tremendous example of the type of retail environment that a lot of suburban communities would like to experience. We're talking about attractive multi-story buildings that still feel in keeping with the sort of small town ambiance. They're not overwhelming or oppressive in terms of the density that they have there. And this largely occurred due to urban renewal investments. Urban renewal was used a number of years ago to build a structured parking garage. That garage was then wrapped with investments of private developers to put storefronts there. And that allowed, that was the catalyst that really unlocked neighboring blocks for additional development. Having that parking garage as an amenity so that folks could get downtown and park and then get out and walk and explore the area really had a tremendous impact on all the development that's taken place in downtown Lake Oswego since then. The Hood River waterfront is another example of a successful urban renewal area. I imagine everybody here has at some point or another taken a trip out to Hood River and enjoyed their time on the waterfront. Tremendous, community retail example there, and an employment area with the breweries and the parks and seeing folks enjoying the riverfront. And all of that was made possible by some major investments in urban renewal in terms of transportation infrastructure, a lot of other utility infrastructure, and then the park improvements that took place there. So, I mean, if you look around the state of Oregon at some of the towns that you've enjoyed visiting and have a thriving downtown, chances are urban renewal played a role in investing in those areas. Okay, so how does this work with what you are specifically focused on investing in now? That's where the 5-year action plan comes in. The urban renewal plan is great, but it's a 20, 30-year time frame. It's really hard to make strategic decisions today based on such a long-term plan. So the 5-year action plan looks at what we think are realistic estimates of financial capacity in the medium term, and which of the projects on the list are most important to try to fund with that capacity in that medium term. And then there's still the budget decisions that need to take place. Are you guys biennial budgeting, I think? So every 2 years, you still decide, okay, based on this current upcoming year's financial data, which of these projects do we think we can invest in? But the 5-year plan allows you to have a kind of this intermediate effort to guide those budgeting decisions.
So will we be adopting a 5-year plan this year,
So the urban renewal,
or reviewing, I guess?
the board, which is council, has adopted a plan, a 5-year plan. And it was, we went through, I'm looking to Joseph, we went through a community board, our urban renewal board actually reviewed that, helped write it, and then it was adopted before we went out for debt. So when we went out for the SAFE debt back in, I don't know, 6 months ago, we included a portion of urban renewal debt. So we now have that debt in place. We are bringing the board back together. The Urban Renewal Board will be getting back together in the near future to talk about the programming side extensively, but there will also be discussions about the projects that are recommended for funding for the next biennium.
So does the 5-year action plan get updated biennially, or is it set for 5 years?
That's a great question, Nick.
It's not a required updating schedule. So each community can decide. A lot of communities will choose, especially with a biennial budget, so you don't feel like you're on the treadmill of every single year updating it, but every 2 years updating it seems like a reasonable choice. That being said, there might not be need for major changes to it on a 2-year basis, because the same priorities you had are probably still those priorities. You can update it with better cost estimates on the projects that you have, or to reflect the actual tax revenues that were collected over that period of time.
Or if something was completed early, you could add something else in.
I would say that this body, when we go into the budget in May, will be meeting as the Urban Renewal Budget Board, and you all will be receiving an update on what our recommended expenditures are for the biennium using that document. Does that make more sense? So you still have a role in this. I'm just letting you know that the programming side of that role is going to the Urban Renewal Board that we're working with right now. I believe Councilor Stavignyard is currently the chair of that board, and then we have 4 or 6 community members. Do you remember?
6. Yeah, it's supposed to be 7 at least.
Okay. So we have 6 community members right now who are on that board, and they'll be meeting, my guess is in the next 3 months.
And from a terminology standpoint, is the Urban Renewal Board the redevelopment committee?
It is.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, got it. Okay.
So
Hey, can you guys please talk into the microphones?
Sorry.
Having trouble hearing.
Sorry, I was asking if the Urban Renewal Committee is the redevelopment committee, and it is.
And he used the correct terminology, and I did not. Thank you.
I'm on the Community Advisory Committee, so that's, I was just
Appreciate
wanted to make
that,
sure. Just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
There wasn't a separate board.
All right, so I'll try to get through the last few slides we have here. This one's on the fund structure itself. This gets into the weeds of how you set up your fund structure for an urban renewal area, urban renewal agency. The first bullet point is the most important one here, that you should have a separate tax increment fund or special revenue fund from all other funds that the agency has. The tax increment finance revenues have their unique restrictions that they can only be spent on debt, and they can only be spent as much as your maximum indebtedness. You don't want to blend those resources with others that you might get. Your debt proceeds, rent that you receive from a property that you own. You buy a property and sell it, you have proceeds from land sale. You don't want to mix those $2 together because it becomes very difficult to make sure that you're complying with your maximum indebtedness. So keeping that separate from the other funds is the most critical piece of this fund structure slide.
So that fund is just for the bonds that you're issuing, it's not for anything else that the Urban Renewal Agency is doing?
Well, so I mentioned earlier that there's a pay-as-you-go approach, and I've also mentioned that you can only spend your tax increment dollars on debt. And if that sounds contradictory, it is, but there are 2 different flavors of debt. There is what I would call real debt, or long-term debt, where you are borrowing money that you cannot pay back that year, and you need to make a structured payment plan to pay it back in the future. That's true debt. But for the legal folks out there that have been advising urban renewal agencies in Oregon for decades and trying to grapple with this requirement that your tax revenues can only be spent on debt, but you don't need to necessarily borrow long-term money all the time, how do you make that work? There are other types of legal debt where you are paying that debt off immediately. So one of the ways that they do this is through a de jure borrowing, a borrowing of the day, where you would go to a bank and say, I'd like to borrow $100, and they give you $100, and you turn around and pay them back with it. And now you have used your revenue to pay the debt, but you did it all in one day. So it's still you're only spending the resources you have in the bank. You're spending what you bring in that year on a cash basis, a pay-as-you-go basis, but there was official debt that existed for one day. More recently, folks have said you can cut the bank entirely out of that, and the city's general fund could loan you the money, and then you pay back the city's general fund. So you don't need to pay bankers and interest and things like that. And then there's also, even without having that official borrowing and exchange of money occurring, the lawyers that advise on this topic have gone to say, you know, there's contract indebtedness. And if you hire a house painter and you sign a contract that says you're going to pay $10,000 to paint your house, well, as soon as you sign that contract, you're in debt to that painter for that amount of money. And so just having that contract or just adopting a budget that says you're going to pay these things to these people could be construed as contract debt. So there's a number of different ways that you can spend your tax increment dollars on debt that doesn't look like long-term structured payments. But in any case, we do want to keep that tax increment fund separate from all of your other resources that aren't limited to debt, so that you can continue to spend those dollars on other projects without having the money be tainted and combined.
So quick check with the budget committee. We have about a half dozen slides.
Actually, all the other slides on this presentation are
the
supporting
extras.
materials. Right, yeah.
Okay.
So I was
So we're almost
freaking
done.
out about it too, yeah. So the last thing here is this bullet point. We've talked about it a little bit earlier tonight on the difference between staff and consultant roles and responsibilities. There is no one-size-fits-all approach here. Some urban renewal agencies have their own permanent staff that they are paying as employees. Others have contract staff that are consultants that are doing this work for them, but they are dedicated directly to the urban renewal area. They don't work for the city, they work for the urban renewal area. And then other communities use city staff to do this, but reimburse the city for those expenditures. There are pros and cons to those different approaches, and as we've talked about, you can do a little of both. The one thing about having dedicated staff to your urban renewal agency is that they will remain focused on the priorities of the urban renewal agency as opposed to being pulled in a bunch of different directions that the city is going in. So that can be a benefit for the urban renewal agency, but it can also be more expensive to have permanent staff or a consultant that's always on call to run an urban renewal area, as opposed to only reimbursing city staff for a fraction of their time. That being said, I also know some cities that are pretty liberal with the amount of reimbursements that they do for city staff, and can have some pretty high expenditures for administration, even while not having any of their dedicated staff, but just reimbursing city staff for their time. So there isn't any one-size-fits-all approach, but it's something you should consider, is which of those options sounds best for you. How much dedicated staff time do you want, given the level of expenditures that you have and the projects you want to see implemented here, and how much do you want to rely on city staff that have other responsibilities and are trying to fit this in?
The mayor has a question first, but then I'll.
Mayor Beatty, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I actually have a few questions. My first one is, when we talked about, I went on an urban renewal, I was at the Oregon Mayors Association conferences last weekend, and I went on an urban renewal tour of Hood River. And when you talk about a urban renewal district being closed, is that just that you have reached the maximum indebtedness, and so you're not taking any more tax increment, or does it also mean you've spent all of your money? Can you close it and still spend the unspent money? I guess is my question.
Yeah, so usually closed means that you have paid off all of your debt and that you are no longer collecting tax increment dollars. Sometimes jurisdictions take even more formal steps to officially close down the plan and say this plan is completed. Other districts choose to keep the plan open because they may have other funds that they've collected. Any dollars that are not tax increment dollars tend to be referred to as program income. And a lot of times that comes from land sales or from rent if you own properties that has tenants in it. But it can come from a number of different sources. But if you have any of that program income, you may still have projects and programs in the area that you want to continue investing in. And even though your tax increment authority is closed, you are still actively administering the plan. So it kind of depends on how many other resources you have available as to whether the entire plan closes or just the tax increment collection piece.
Okay. And in Hood River, they've had 4, which I found interesting for a town that's less than half our size. They've had 4 districts, or they're creating their 4th now. The one you showed, they said is closing now or next year after 15 years. And that means it accrued value so much that they hit their maximum indebtedness early? Is that what that means?
Yeah, they had a fairly small maximum indebtedness and had very rapid growth in construction value. And a lot of that construction was happening at a time when it was having more bang for its buck. They were getting nearly full value, especially for employment uses at that point in time. So yeah, it was just very successful for an urban renewal area.
Okay. I mean, they said it was closing early, so it was or sooner than their projections had been. So it just, the valuations went up faster than had been predicted. Is that the right way to?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, as someone who does a lot of those forecasts, I always am glad when I see one that is ahead of schedule instead of behind schedule.
Right, right. And so then thinking about our numbers, I mean, you showed us what our numbers have been. We have 4 apartment complexes, 2 open, or mostly open, 1 coming this fall, and 1 coming in a couple of years. Is that enough to, and then all told, I think it's 2, 3, 5, something like 800, 900 apartments. Is that something that will, like, hit, I guess, can we expect a bump in our valuation out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. The magnitude of these projects is significant, and it will support the projected cash flow that we showed earlier today. It was a couple of years ago that I did the last forecast here, but I went and looked at my notes from that, and I think at that point in time it was the Axle Tree apartments had recently completed, and there were in my notes for our forecast, I had noted that a similar project of that type occurring every 2 or 3 years would be sufficient to achieve the forecast that we had called for here. And you've just pointed out that there are 4 of those projects happening in short order here. So that type of development is what you need to see sustained over the long term to allow these projections to come true. Now, there's the wrinkle of the vertical housing development zone and how a lot of these projects are qualifying for a tax abatement for the first 10 years of their value. And so that will slow down the growth in revenue over the next decade, but it will just mean that that's deferred growth. And 10 years later, there'll be that big bump in value when those things become taxable again. So those are the types of projects you need.
Axle Tree's the only one who's gotten that, I believe, so.
Even
Correct.
better for your forecast.
I do understand about that. Okay, thank you. I think that was it for my questions.
And just to add on that, I was just looking at the page from, page 11 of the packet, that the Urban Renewal Fund, looks like it brought in like 5 million this year, only had about 400K. I know there weren't really any expenditures this year, and the majority is going to be next year. But it looks like at the end of this year, we have about 6 million in the Urban Renewal Fund. So we have like a Nasir little contract for 1 year from the Blazers player kind of thing. That's pretty good. Solid power forward, I guess. That's good. And that like 5 million that we've brought in this year, because I want to say the numbers was much lower than 5 million that I'd seen previously. That's going to keep going up higher, or am I?
Part of that 5 million are the bond proceeds.
Got it.
That we
Okay.
received. So that's about a little bit more than 4 million of the total.
Good to know.
Of the 23 million in bonds.
Okay.
Was for urban renewal projects. When Nick was showing that 5-year plan.
Got it.
There was roughly $4 million of infrastructure work.
Got it. Okay.
That's been bonded, and that's the revenue, that's the biggest piece of that.
So there will be a good amount of expenditures from.
So those expenditures are coming, they'll be showing up when you're looking at fiscal year '24.
Gotcha.
Quarterly reports,
Yeah.
you're gonna start seeing that.
We're talking Jabari Walker on the Blazers now.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
I like him better anyway. Sounds good. Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions for Nick Popenick at this point?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to go back to your last slide for a second. So the staffing component of this, Toby and I have had conversations about it. I've talked to Joseph about it. We're a relatively small urban renewal area too. So part of my concern, I'll own that, is overstaffing it as well and making sure that we have enough revenue to keep that staff person busy and focused and on the project long term. That's part of why we decided to contract with John Southgate, is to make sure that John really was dedicated on the programming side of this. He can do this with his eyes closed. He's done this for years. And so it was also a good dollar amount to pay for the programming. But we've had dialogues around what do we do with staffing and how do we keep this up, because Joseph definitely has more projects than he can get through.
Anne, can you tell me what you mean by programming?
Sure. So programming is the non-indebtedness. So it's not the infrastructure improvements, it's the programs that try and bring businesses to downtown. So it's the interior improvements that we may fund. It could be the storefront grants. It could be that type of thing. Anything that helps the businesses get underway and to make it here in Milwaukie.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we have no more questions, I guess we can move on. Thank you for your presentation and your very thorough answers.
Thank you.
And move that presentation.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick, the pride of Franklin High School.
Wow.
Okay, so now we are going to have a discussion of the Citizen Utility Advisory Board responsibilities, led by Toby and Peter Passerella.
Yes, this is a sort of a brief update and an idea that the city is looking at of essentially combining some of the duties of the CUAB and the Budget Committee. And so Peter will talk a little bit about some of the history that we've had with our Citizen Utility Advisory Board and kind of the next steps for this combined duties. That's what I'll cover afterwards.
Thanks, Toby.
Yeah.
And I'm Peter Passerelli. I'm the Public Works Director for the city. And I've been involved with our Citizen Utility Advisory Board for about the last 6 years. I mean, pretty much since I've been here. I'd worked with our engineering director and then city engineer with that board. And that board, I believe, was constituted to provide, to act as an advisory board to council, to provide advice on our utility rates and to review our capital improvement program. When I first started at the time, I believe we were still in the process of adopting our fee schedules on an annual basis. And with, I think, the last budget cycle, we moved to a 2-year cycle. Over the 6 years, early on, we really had a pretty good turnout with the Utility Advisory Board. We had a good core group of people that had been appointed and had been part of that for quite a while. But then over the last 6 years, we started losing people and found it a struggle to find interested residents, people that were interested here in Milwaukie to participate. I know Sophie was one of our last one of our last members. I think the last
Closing member.
We had several people that resigned for personal reasons or termed out, and then the last recruitment phase that we did over the last year, we were really unable to find anybody that was willing to participate in that board. So, I had approached Ann, and it was something we had been talking about over the last year about what are the options that we have. And one of what we came up was, well, perhaps there's a way to work with the Budget Committee to provide that same responsibility for reviewing our rates and looking at our CIP. And as you recall, I think every budget cycle, we do meet jointly. We were meeting jointly with the Budget Committee and CUAB to talk about rates and our CIP.
Can I just add one piece? We also had a lot of interest from the Budget Committee in things like our CIP and in our rates. And so part of this too was, if there's interest here and we have a consistent board that's meeting regularly, is this a better connection? So the same content that would go to a public board in one hand would also then go to a public board in another, was the thought process. So I'm going to turn it over to Toby.
Yeah. So that's perfect. There was a lot of duplication and crossover in terms of interest and scope between the CUAB and the Budget Committee. And so what we're looking to do is make the Budget Committee either in whole or as a subcommittee of the Budget Committee, take on the responsibilities of the Citizen Utility Advisory Board. And so we will be going to council in a work session on September 19th, and then eventually for council to discuss like what those responsibilities will be of the CUAB as part of the Budget Committee and what how it will be constituted. And then eventually, November 7th, we are scheduled to go to adopt whatever the recommendations that come out of that work session. Coming to you tonight, especially for the citizen members of the Budget Committee, is an opportunity for you to ask some questions, give any concerns that you might have about additional responsibilities, or be supportive of doing this. What it would mean is probably at least twice a year, potentially with each quarterly Budget Committee meeting, tacking on an extra hour or half an hour of time. We would try and not make it an extra meeting. We would try and make it so that some additional times we're not taking up additional evenings out of your busy schedules. So at that point, any questions, comments,
I guess,
concerns?
My question is, what would we be doing in an extra hour of a meeting? I mean, isn't it possible to just wrap that into our current budget review in some way?
It is possible, and that's feedback that the counselors need to hear from the residents. I would say that a lot of the things, I'd say the main thing that the CUAB did that was completely separate from Budget Committee that I'm aware of is the review of rate setting. In terms, the piece about reviewing the capital improvement plan that winds up getting adopted within the budget, there's a lot of crossover there. The interest in revenue forecasts and expenditures that the community will need to support, that's a lot of crossover. The CUAB also was the group that was charged with reviewing the rates and the methodology of those rates.
So the rates are actually negotiated by staff, right?
Well, they're not necessarily negotiated. I mean, there's a discussion and an analysis that's done. And in some cases, we will do that internally. And then in other cases, we've gone out and we've hired a consultant to help us go through and do a cost of service analysis of our utilities and to help us maybe, recalibrate where our rates are. So we last did a cost of service study for our water and wastewater rates, I think in 2019, I think it was. And that was a process that we worked through with our the Citizen Utility Advisory Board, CUAB, and then we brought those results to one of the joint meetings we had, one of those joint budget meetings that we had with the Budget Committee.
And so is that rate analysis now going to be happening biennially, since you said the rates have moved to a?
Well, we have been doing it biennially the last time, and in the past, we were doing it every year.
Right.
So the preference, I guess, that would be certainly open for discussion on how we do that. But we went through the analysis, last budget cycle and did set those on a biennium basis. So the rates were adopted for the 2-year budget cycle.
Lisa had a question, or her hand was just up.
I actually had a comment, I guess. I was a little disappointed to hear the way Toby just framed it. I mean, I had talked with the staff back during the interview process for our boards and commissions about this, so this isn't a surprise to me, but I do see it personally as a more robust, needing to be a more robust review than just an extra half hour on a budget committee meeting. I mean, some quarters that may be enough, but like tomorrow, the city council agenda has SDC setting for water, and to me, if we don't have a committee that's really digging into the details on that, then we're gonna need to have much more deeper engagement at the city council level when we have those discussions. So I do think it's rate setting, it's SDC setting, and it's the master plans of the utilities, and Peter is also launching into a wastewater master planning process.
Stormwater.
And that's the things that the CUAB has traditionally done, and I don't think for 30-minute meetings a year gives those the justice they're due.
Well, and Mayor, this is Ann. I actually would agree. based on the discussions we had with you. What we had hoped for was a subcommittee of sorts, so that we weren't taking everyone's time. Council is going to hear some of these things, but I think there's been interest in continuing to get community engagement around this. You are correct, it's wastewater? No, it's stormwater.
Stormwater systems plan, and then, yes, we have our water SDC rate presentation tomorrow night from our consultants. And in the past, that was a presentation that we would bring to the CUAB. But this past year, we didn't have a functioning committee because of a lack of
Participation. The part of this too, just so people know, you talk about the CIP because when we set rates, it's because we're going to be funding projects, and those projects are called out in our master plans. So this is, I mean, Peter's really good at this, and so I think he is used to seeing a lot of this. It is unique. It is unique to see how these things are grouped, how we decide which projects get funded, how we set the rates in order to fund them, why we do a rate increase on a given year versus a future year. All of this is actually why I thought this body might be interested in it, because when we've talked about the CIP in the past, we haven't gotten into as much detail around what projects and why. Those projects are set through plans, and these are the plans that set those projects. So it's a chicken and an egg here, right? So this gives you a chance to touch them before all the projects are officially funded and lined out. And what was coming to council in the past was, CUAB's looked at this, we're doing these projects, this is the work that, and there was never a chance to talk to the consultants about why, or to the staff about why those projects were in the master plans or in the system plans. Does that make, Mayor, is that closer to what you were remembering?
You were cutting out some, so
Oh. No, totally fair. It's just more, it will be more in depth. And I think that if you're going to do this, it's probably, my recommendation would be a subcommittee, probably not extending the full committee. Because at least our hope, I think Peter's hope, my hope had been that there were some individuals who really wanted to talk about that work, right? And I think that that's why our our community utility advisory board is getting transitioned into a subcommittee for the budget committee, is you all actually care a lot about it. You usually are the ones approving our expenditures, but you don't get to have much say into how we got there.
Do you envision this subcommittee including both citizens and council, or just citizens, given that the council's going to be approving it at the end, or what?
That is up to you, and actually up to council. I would hate to answer for them.
Right.
I'd like to ask what Sophie thinks.
Yeah.
'Cause I think she's got some insight I might
Some
add.
on-the-ground knowledge. I'll say I went to 2 CUAB meetings
More than I did.
since I was appointed last summer, and they were both last fall or winter. And I think the real benefit of those meetings for me was like both the deep knowledge that Peter has and that other members of the committee had about the utilities and how they work in the city, and like what it means when we tack on some money for renewable energy and environmental initiatives, and the implications of that. That was where my real learning was. I think when we were talking at the beginning, Toby, my concern was about that deep knowledge of the utilities and how they work, and the knowledge and experience of someone who's been involved in these rate setting conversations for a long time. That feels like the real loss to me, and not having that committee anymore. And at the same time, it was 2 meetings, so hopefully I would have become more useful eventually. But I didn't feel like I was bringing any particular expertise or knowledge to that committee other than asking what, certain utility projects were, or for acronym clarification, which is a role I intend to play here too. But anyway, that's what I would say, I think.
Well, so one follow-on question is that you feel like we've lost a lot of experience and expertise.
Well-
I think was what I heard. And so we would have to develop that either with the existing committee or within the subcommittee.
Yeah, I think I would want that, I think, to be a priority of doing some like deep learning, because the member who brought the most of that resigned for personal reasons, so we're not going to get him back necessarily, but like I think that learning feels like really important to make informed decisions and to be able to like have some analysis around rates and projects.
Thank you.
And I think for us, our thought process was you're going to have to do that learning from scratch, either on CUAB or in this committee format, because we've lost so much of the depth. You're amazing. I should be clear. We didn't lose you. Thank you for that. But I think that was our thought process, is if there is a way, because at the time it was John Stoll who was on the budget committee, and he asked really important, critical questions. But he asked them at such a late point in the process that they couldn't be changed into the broader financial narrative. And so part of my hope here is that by doing this as a part of this process, you're able to touch it at the right moment and still have the influence that I think the budget committee, at least in the past, has wanted to have. Yeah.
I just want to add one more thing. Number one, I'm just want to say, super interested in this, and I'm just always want to say with any utility, because we all need water, and I'm glad that the city is the one providing the water here, and we're not, dealing with a mega corporation that's publicly listed being in charge of these things in an executive boardroom. But it's something that I'd be super interested in, and honestly, it also would, I think, create more outreach, because I know the budget committee is not everyone's cup of tea. I can guarantee you my wife has never watched any of these. But, I have a sub 2-year-old, and, one of our larger bills is the water bill. And it's really good to know where all of that comes to, because we all assume, it's all factored in, but we've dealt with flooding, in the 90s, and you got to have storm drains and all of that stuff. So that's something that I think I'm really glad that we're keeping that going. That it's not going to go wayside. Yeah. So thank you.
I guess my only comment is I'm in favor of trying to work this transition out. Is everybody else, what's everybody else's opinion?
I'm in favor of working it out and would gladly participate. And just from a practical standpoint, there's a finite number of people on the budget committee. So what are you thinking as far as a subcommittee and the numbers? And the question was asked about, would it just be citizens or citizens and counselor? If it's just citizens, it's even more of a finite number to draw from. So just wanting to know more from a practical standpoint what that vision is.
Well, it's not currently a voting board. The budget committee would be making the votes. So you're not held to a quorum, which has been one of our issues. I also know that you all make most of these meetings, which is really great, which is why Toby was trying to tie it to these meetings, is because he recognizes you come to the meetings. So what I'm hearing generally is the community members would be open to participating on a subcommittee. We would try, and I think we usually are at an hour to an hour and a half for the CUAB meetings. So this wouldn't be in excess of that. We could talk to you about whether or not you wanted to stay after or go before budget meetings. We could hold the budget meetings a little later and start these a little earlier so that we were able to play that out a bit. You are making a recommendation to the whole here, but you're also, the real voter on this is going to be the council members, right? So the budget committee won't have they are the ones who adopt, the council is the one who adopts the SDC plans and these other documents that you would be involved in. I think it makes some sense to separate them and have the community members be the subcommittee, the council members stay on budget committee, and then you all can talk at these meetings or at council meetings about what your concerns are or your thoughts are. But I'm making that up as I'm going. I literally did not have any idea on that before this.
Is the
Yeah.
CUAB, was the CUAB meeting quarterly also?
Well, when I first started, they were meeting monthly, and then as we transitioned to more of that biennial budgeting and rate-making process, we went to a quarterly process, with the exception of that sort of budget cycle. So like November, December, January, February, those were like 4 months where they met monthly. At that, yeah.
Okay. And anybody else have any comments? Can we move on? So our next agenda item is Ann's report.
And today it's not going to be Anne. Today it's going to be Toby. And the reason that I asked Toby to talk about this, so at the end, over the last couple of years, in alignment with the CUAB conversation, has been a dialogue with our former chair and budget committee member who is really concerned about making sure that we were not taking in more revenues to our CIP, and making sure that we were expending our CIP when we made a commitment in the budget process. And so we've been looking at this for the last couple months. Toby has an update. It's not the end of the line, it's the beginning, but I wanted to let him talk to you about it.
Yeah, that's the lead-in point, is that this is a process, we're early in the process. And so earlier this month, had a meeting with Ann and myself, Michael, and Leslie was there, and we also invited John Stahl, who's been on the budget committee for quite a while and was also at CUAB, and has had some of that strong interest and background in the utilities and the rates and getting projects done. And one of his observations has been that our fund balances within our water, sewer, stormwater funds is growing. And so the question is, are our rates, why are they growing essentially? Is it rate-based? What is it based on? And so I went back, and I'm not going to give you the whole analysis. I'm going to give you the kind of the conclusions. Looked at 9 years of histories from our annual comprehensive financial reports, and I can verify, correct, our fund balances have been growing, and over the last 9 years. And what I then did was I looked at both revenues and expenditure budgets versus actual. And so we've been doing a very good job of budgeting our estimating the revenues in terms of the amount that we're estimating is generally the amount that we're bringing in for all three utilities. Actually, stormwater, we're under collecting a little bit. I'm going to take a look at that and why. But water and sewer, we're pretty close. Operational expenses, so the people that are going out and doing the work for our water system and our stormwater system, our sewer system, we're doing a good job of budgeting that and spending what we're budgeting. So both of those pieces, key pieces, doing a good job. Capital improvement plan, we have been, compared to what we're budgeting, we have been under delivering. And generally, it varies a bit by system, but we're delivering about half of the CIP that we're budgeting. And so that is the primary contributor to how our fund balance has been growing. However, what I wanted to look at in addition, so it's another side to that coin. What would happen if we actually had spent the entire CIP? And what I found is that if we actually had been spending the amount of budgeted CIP each year, the fund balances not only wouldn't have been growing, they would have been shrinking, and over the last 9 years would have gone negative. So, in general, where we are in this first step is we've done this historical look. It does point out that yes, these fund balances are growing, and it appears to be the CIP. What we need to do is the next steps is look at changes we need to make in terms of how we're doing our CIP budget, how we're delivering the projects that are in that CIP. So we need to do a better job at delivering, and I think we need to also be doing a more realistic job of budgeting. Don't over budget, and let's try and do a better job of delivering those things. And in doing that, we would then be essentially in balance with the rate revenues. So if we can do that, then the rate revenues are largely appropriate for what we're looking at. Peter, who has left, when we get to a longer term, when we get to some of these master plans that we're talking about, there's a bigger discussion about rates and the capital plan and some of the big projects that we have coming down the road in the next decade plus. That said, the near term, what this group is going to be looking at in this next year is trying to do a better job, and we're going to do a better job of bringing to you a CIP that matches our forecasted revenues in a better way, hopefully, of being able to deliver those projects. So that's where we are. And did I miss anything? Leslie, did
I
miss
just
anything
have a
from our meeting?
question. I wonder if any of the delay in CIP projects is due to COVID. Seems to me like we just hit a,
I think the biggest reason is due to railroad.
oh, because we can't get them to agree on the.
We
some of
finally
it.
did, but it's been 7 years to cut a contract with the railroad for one of our largest stormwater projects. It means that we've been sitting on funding, but we've finally signed the contract. And my hope is that that expenditure will show a significant buy down in the amount of reserves that have been growing. So there are things that will help us do this. I don't think it's been it's taken all 7 years for them to negotiate the deal. COVID definitely impacted it. We also received some ARPA funds that we needed to make sure got spent first over other dollars, so those are going to get spent first. And then it's really hard when we build our CIP, we're often doing it based on very little data in many ways. We're not at 90% drawings for the design. So we're guessing the last couple of years, inflation has required us to take some money from some projects to make sure that the top tier projects are done and the second tier sometimes don't have enough until we go back and we get more cash, right? So this is, there's a lot of reasons. I think that our goal, and Jen Garbley is amazing. She's heading up our CIP. She was in these conversations as well. She's committed to figuring this out too. And it probably means fewer projects on the CIP, but it also, we're going to have to increase some of the dollars on these projects because we're also seeing the inflation. We just haven't been able to estimate our inflation rates right. So it's a lot of things. I think he's right to see it. And I think there are things that we can do to address some of it. We just are going to try and figure out how to get it as tight as we can for you all going into the coming budgets. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have anything like a burn rate?
So when you say burn rate, you mean
Expenditure rate.
expenditure rate, like how much are we spending per
Well, I
month
mean,
or per year?
yeah, I mean, you know, quite frankly, you know, if you don't have, I don't think you have to be, you know, locked in concrete. But, you know, if you have a CIP of, I don't know, $5 million in a year, you know, and if you're, you know, halfway through the year and you've spent $1 million on it, you know, you're not going to get there. And so that's a tool, you know, that, you know, it's kind of like something in a dashboard where you can kind of monitor your progress over the year, and you can, it's actually quite easy not to spend your money.
It is really easy.
Yeah.
And it's not easy in our general fund right now, just so we're clear. But I agree with you in the CIP, and I think that that's actually what Toby's trying to do right now with Jen, is to look at what are actual expenditures each year and what are they on a 6-month basis in order to determine whether or not we're consistently having the same burn rate issues, because that's really when we have a trigger that we need to be modifying how we budget. But yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So our next item is the
Oh,
proposed.
can I say one City Hall update?
Yes.
We're moving. So the next budget meeting is going to be in a different building.
Really?
We're closing the doors here in City Hall on the 11th of September at noon. We will be opening the doors of City Hall on September 15th at the other building. The ribbon cutting is on October 6th, I believe. It's first Friday. And we'll be starting at this building, we'll be ending at that building. So yay, talk about a CIP. We will spend all those dollars, I promise. And that is on schedule.
Great.
Woohoo. Woohoo. I know, it's little things.
And we visited, the council visited the city hall last week, and it just looks great.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
It is beautiful.
Yeah.
They've done a great job.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
It's a really nice dais. This has done a great job of keeping us going, but the new dais will allow for us all to be together in a really nice, large space. It seats 125, I think, outside of the dais,
It's
which
enormous,
is really,
yeah.
What floor is it on?
It's on the third floor, with a beautiful view overlooking a bunch of trees and towards the library. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay.
That's all I
So
have now.
now are we done?
Yeah, now I'm done.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the next, what was it? Did I lose
Meeting
my place?
dates.
Yeah,
Meeting
meeting
dates, that's right.
So I'll just be really fast on this. The meeting dates are on your agenda. These are the proposed meeting dates for the next year. It is something that's in the resolution that established the budget committee, that we bring these to you during this meeting to make sure that they work for you. Do want to note that the November one is a little bit off cycle, because the normal cycle would have been like the week of Thanksgiving. We try and avoid that. And one of the things that we will do is, I believe we've sent out tentative meeting invites for both November and February. When we get, if you approve these, we'll also get the August one. We haven't set the May, which is actually the budget committee meetings for the biennial budget process. We'll get those to you as soon as possible. And I also just want to apologize for, I didn't get the meeting, this as a calendar invite meeting sent to you until today. And so my apologies for that. And the idea here is we will try and get these on your calendars tomorrow, if these are all good with you guys.
And just so you know, the February 12th should also be February 19th, but that is President's Day.
I was going to say, I did get an
Yep.
email about that.
So those two would be earlier, but you have to approve them. That's why they say tentative if you approve them.
Yeah, was that a typo, February 19th?
Well, 19th is President's Day, so I sent out an invite
have
hold
normally
for the
been.
12th. Yeah,
Right, sorry.
because our financial policies say it's the third
It's
Monday.
the third Monday.
So do we need to take a formal vote to approve these?
That would be helpful.
Okay. Do I
Make a
hear-
motion to approve the dates as listed on the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other business to come before our committee?
None from the finance staff.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna be just really annoying, but a question for Anne really quick.
Sure.
Just because I'm weird and I looked at all this in
I love that you
advance.
read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously, thank you.
I was just wondering, page 9, the staffing levels, I was just curious, your opinion. I know this has kind of been mentioned the last couple meetings. I've only been on the committee for a year or so now, but there's a lot of short staff on there, and I know you personally have been probably really, impacted by Kelly leaving and the time until I forget the name of the new person that's here.
Emma, she's
Emma?
amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But I just know, outside of, I'm guessing outside of the police department that you guys don't get any overtime, but I just wanted a morale check of how everyone's doing, because I know there's going to be seems like a lot of stuff's going to be happening in the next year, so.
That is a very kind and lovely question. Thank you. I think there's a couple of things on here. The first is that the community development positions are not real. So please know, it says 8.9, but it's really 7.9. No, 6.9. And I say that because one of those positions was a former goal of city council. We didn't refill it when it was vacated. The other one was a parking position that we thought we were going to fill. After talking to experts in the field, we decided to not fill that. So both of those positions are just being held. You won't see them filled unless something changes on council goals. That puts us at 6.9. The police one has been a lot, and they're working really hard to fill it. And I deeply appreciate all the work of Luke and Ryan and Tony to get those filled. And actually, all the background checkers, because that's part of this work too. Those include a couple of former captains and chiefs from the city of Milwaukie who also continue to serve our community, which I really appreciate. So then you get into city manager's office. That would be Kelly's position and John Hennington's position. Both of those are now filled. We're super excited. So Gabriella started today. She's our new equity program manager. She comes from ODOT. She's amazing and full of energy and just super fun to work with. So she will be moving forward with the council as we go into our equity plan that we're working on right now. And then Emma started a couple months ago, and it was the best day that I've had in a long time. She's an incredible human. She worked on our comprehensive plan and our climate action plan as a consultant. She's brilliant. She has a great background in policy and in government. And she loves Milwaukie specifically. She loves this town. And I love that she came back to us after 6 years. So that's really cool. That leaves us with a few others. So our hiring shortages, where there is probably a morale hit right now, is that we've had a really difficult time getting seasonals. Like super difficult time getting seasonals, and that is a problem across the United States. It's a problem across every government agency I talk to. That means that we don't have as many people to clean out our stormwater basins or to go out and do painting, like road painting and other things. It's a lot of work for our crews to do that and all their other work, so we try and bring people in for those months, and it's been next to impossible. I think we have 2 or 3 seasonals this year, and we were scheduled to have 7 or 8. So that is real, and it is hard. Are there any other? I think those are the ones.
Yeah, those are the big ones.
Okay, but overall, outside of the seasonal, which, yeah, that sucks. That's really bad. But for everything else, you would, to put you on the spot, you would say it's been...
We've had I mean, I think another caveat is we've come out of a time of extreme change.
Yeah.
We're still changing, so moving offices is actually a big impact on people. We're in construction in most of our buildings right now, so our chillers at the library have not worked yet. The building is now 3.5 years old. So that is hard for staff to continually, especially on a day like today. The back of house right now is not functioning. We don't have cooling system in the back of house. So most of our staff are working in the front of house because they can't be in back. And it's hard for our facilities crews who are trying to fix it over and over and over again. That's real. We have a new city hall. It means 2 buildings are going to be leaving their cubicle, the space they worked in consistently. That's a reality.
Gotcha.
And we're doing some seismic improvements over at the public safety building. And that was also a budgeted project that we received some grant funding for. So, yes, there are some things that are going exceptionally well, but we're still not out of COVID.
Yeah.
So I would you read any major newspaper in the United States right now, and they're going to talk about everybody is still trying to find their feet.
Yeah. Okay.
But I adore the staff we have here. I feel blessed and lucky to get to work with his team.
Thank you guys so much. I know
We have great
it's
people.
been a rough...
We're lucky every day.
The chillers work in the new building?
I don't know. I asked Damien, and he said yes, but we haven't had to cool the load while we're all in it. So, yes, right now it's a known system. But the library, and we keep thinking we find a solution, and It's just been a
I bring all this up. I mean, this is probably self-projecting. My work, I feel a little overworked, and I think some other people, a lot, like you mentioned, everyone does. But, if that, becomes the case, unfortunately, I don't know. For me, for example, you never know in the city hall whether or not there's underfunded staff or understaffed or overstaffed kind of thing. So keep bringing it up if it.
Absolutely, we will. There's always a need for more staff in a city of this size. Mary can talk to this. She's been here for a long time. There's always a desire. General fund is tight. We've seen decreases in our franchise fees. You've heard a lot about how much we're capped on increases on our property tax. It's real. And all cities in the state are going to keep having these harder and harder conversations about how you staff with not enough revenue.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to make a comment, sort of following up on you having read the budget. And we have had a jam-packed meeting today, but I do want to say that I think there is great value, particularly since we have so many new members, in doing the walkthrough of the quarterly report so that people can, and so I'm hoping that we will do that before we get into the full budget, so everybody has sort of a same base of understanding.
Absolutely.
About what's going on.
And we'll make a commitment for November.
Okay.
Thanks for that advocacy, Leslie.
I think also as the subcommittee for the CUAB is formed, that having a dedicated meeting just for training to get up to speed on the terminology and everything, and that's a little longer and dedicated to that rather than tacking it on or adding it before would be very helpful for us.
You don't want us just to send you all the last 16 reports and ask you to read them?
You could do that. It might be more. I might be a more effective
Helpful.
member. If you did the
No, absolutely,
training.
100%. That's a very fair request.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody has anything else? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Nobody made it.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you.
So where were you? Was it Italy? No. Ireland, even better.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be watching